The Seventh Hokage fell dead at the feet of his own adopted son. This was supposed to be completely impossible in our world. The strongest man alive should never bleed out in battle, but the red blood stained the entire sacred floor of the office. Let's rewind the tape to understand how this absolute chaos started. The village was perfectly calm just moments before the nightmare began. Nobody saw such a cruel and sudden betrayal coming from inside the house. Kawaki just lost his sanity for good and decided to strike. Bro, you need to picture the exact scene because the vibe got heavy out of nowhere and Konoha's sky turned dark as night. Kawaki didn't show up screaming or making a scene, but he just appeared in the Hokage's office with an empty and totally lethal look. He activated the red karma without saying a single word and then charged at Naruto with pure and uncontrollable murderous intent. Naruto tried to react at first, but he hesitated because he still saw the kid as a real son and didn't want to hurt him. That small hesitation cost him everything and was the most fatal mistake in the history of the ninja world. Kawaki drove a massive black stake through the Hokage's chest, and the sound of that nasty impact echoed through the whole village. Boruto walked into the room at that exact millisecond, and his eyes froze on the completely brutal sight. Your hero's world collapsed right then and there, and his brain just stopped processing the terrifying reality in front of him. Naruto fell to the cold floor, spitting up blood, and life began to fade from his blue eyes incredibly fast. Boruto ran to his father and fell to his knees hard because the pain tore through the boy's soul in an unexplainable and cowardly way. He held the Seventh Hokage's cold body, and a silent scream ripped through his throat, but no human sound could come out. The despair was so insanely high that a twisted anomaly started waking up deep inside Boruto's body. The karma mark on his right arm started burning with an absurd intensity that no one had ever seen before. The seal wasn't resonating with Momoshiki's power, but with an energy that was completely different and much older than the universe itself. The shock of seeing his father die in front of him broke a hidden mental barrier and activated a forbidden defense mechanism in his DNA. The boy's essence went into total collapse, and he desperately needed power, so he wouldn't die from pure agony. Man, you gotta remember that Kurama died in the past and left a tiny bit of chakra residue in Naruto's blood. This residual chakra felt the host's physical death and went into a total panic looking for a new container immediately so it wouldn't vanish. Boruto's karma acted like a massive dimensional vacuum and started sucking up that dark energy in an extremely violent way. But it wasn't just the beast chakra that the seal pulled in, because something way more terrifying and sinister happened right there. The activated karma literally grabbed Naruto's glowing soul as it was leaving his body and dragged it violently into the cursed mark. The Hokage's body turned into gray ash instantly, and Boruto started screaming like a maniac while absorbing his own father's entire essence. Kawaki took a few quick steps back because he felt a primordial dread radiating from every cell in his former brother's body. The air around them began to warp in a freaky way, and gravity simply vanished from inside that totally destroyed room. A black and very dense aura exploded from Boruto's body and disintegrated the entire Hokage building in a single violent second. The smoke cleared fast, and the boy slowly lifted his head, but his eyes weren't human or kind anymore. The karma spread across his entire body, and 10 tails of pure black and dense chakra erupted violently from his back. But then Naruto's soul screamed from inside the seal, and an 11th tail tore through the fabric of reality itself to collect a blood price that no one was ready to pay. The 11th tail ripped through the sky over Konoha, and the air felt heavy like solid lead. Kawaki tried to breathe, but the oxygen simply vanished from the atmosphere around them. The black chakra was so absurdly dense that it crushed the stones on the ground and turned everything into dust. The birth of this new god wasn't silent, because the entire village shook with a brutal multiversal roar. Man, you have never seen a power this dark and this desperate in the entire ninja universe. The karma didn't just suck in the soul, but it fused that heroic spirit with the evil Otsutsuki DNA. This twisted mix created a genetic and spiritual anomaly that the universe simply didn't know how to process. Boruto's body began to float slowly, and his eyes glowed with a totally corrupted and lethal purple. Sasuke came flying onto the scene, and the Uchiha's blood ran cold instantly. He activated his Rinnegan by instinct, but the Supreme, I started bleeding from the sheer pressure. No one could get close to the epicenter, and the beast's gravitational force pushed away any kind of attack or jutsu. The 11th tail whipped through thin air and cut an entire mountain range in half without even touching it. Kawaki felt true and pure fear for the first time in his life and backed away with his legs shaking hard. He materialized the black staff with sweaty hands and tried to focus his gaze on the floating monstrosity. His former brother tried to attack using a quick dimensional portal, but the 11-tailed beast simply canceled the portal with a scream. Space and time began to bend around Boruto because the energy was too huge for that small dimension. Boruto's skin cracked all over, and thick black marks covered his face down to his neck. Mamoshiki's horn grew in a very crooked way and joined a chakra crown that looked like the old fox's ears. He opened his mouth, and the voice that came out wasn't the kind voice of a young ninja you used to know. It was two voices overlapping at the same time, and one of them was Naruto himself groaning in extreme and deep pain. Kawaki screamed in uncontrollable despair and threw the staff toward that terrifying and invincible entity's chest. The divine weapon traveled at light speed, but the 11th tail caught the staff in midair without even trying. The chakra tail crushed the indestructible metal and turned it into stardust in a fraction of a second. Boruto blinked, and in that same instant he appeared right in front of the enemy, holding his neck with absurd strength. The physical shock was massive, and Kawaki coughed up blood instantly because his internal organs were crushed by the violent air pressure. Boruto squeezed the traitor's throat and began to drain his life force in a ruthless and cruel way. The beast's purple eyes looked deep into the soul of the Hokage's killer and promised the worst torture in the history of the entire ninja world. Kawaki tried to activate his own karma, but his power was completely swallowed and blocked by the monster's colossal presence. Sasuke couldn't just stand there watching and drew his sword covered in Amaterasu's black flames, running to save the boy. The Uchiha jumped with absolute perfection and delivered a lethal blow aimed at the arm, holding the rival's neck in the air. But the divine fire touched the dark chakra, and the flames simply went out, as if they were a weak and useless candle. Boruto dropped Kawaki violently on the ground and slowly turned his face to stare at his former master with a terrifying and lethal coldness. Listen, in this exact millisecond, a flash of consciousness sparkled deep inside the host's chaotic mind. Naruto's soul fought bravely within that dark sea of pure shadows and tried to hold back his beloved son's final blow. The beast's fist stopped an inch from Sasuke's face, and the wind from the punch devastated the massive forest behind the powerful Uchiha. A human tear ran down the monster's right eye, but the left eye glowed with a pure intent to totally annihilate Konoha. The monstrously distorted voice echoed through the crater, warning everyone that the ninja era had finally reached its definitive end. The 11-tailed god raised his massive hands to the dark sky, and a giant black sphere began to form quickly above. The energy pulled the light from all the stars, and the whole of Konoha started levitating toward that anomaly of imminent destruction. The final attack was ready to wipe the village off the map, but then an unexpected person touched the divine beast's shoulder, and time stopped in a completely freaky way. Time froze completely, and the sphere of massive destruction hung suspended in the village air. The small hand that touched the monster's shoulder belonged to Himawari, and she wasn't shaking at all. She looked deep into that monstrosity's eyes, but she didn't feel afraid of her own brother. The girl activated her Byakugan, and then tried to calm the dark fury of the 11 tails of chakra. Man, you might think the power of love saves everything in the story, but here it is very different. The beast turned its neck quickly, and the dense energy threw the girl far away from there. Boruto no longer had control over his mind, and his human sanity was dead. The massacre had to happen now, because the god of chaos demanded a brutal sacrifice of blood. Time began to run normally again, and gravity crushed Konoha with double the force. Kawaki tried to crawl away from the threat, but the 11th tail stepped firmly on his back. The violent impact sank the traitor into the ground and broke almost every bone in his body. The fake brother's crying echoed loudly, but the monster felt zero mercy. Sasuke used his perfect purple Susanoo to try and save his student's mortal enemy's life. The glowing giant stepped forward with the sacred sword and tried to cut the massive chakra tails. But Boruto just raised a single finger and fired a totally devastating black bolt. The attack went straight through the impenetrable armor and destroyed the legendary Susanoo in a single second. The powerful Uchiha fell to the ground, spitting up blood, and felt that his own death was near. He realized right then that this boy was no longer a ninja, but an uncontrollable deity. Boruto took flight again and stared at the giant sphere in the black sky. He snapped his dirty fingers, and the ball of pure energy split into thousands of pieces. Dude, the shower of dark meteors fell heavy on the village and disintegrated buildings rapidly. Shikamaru tried to organize a smart defense, but his protective shadow was consumed by the macabre light. The shinobi ran in desperation and tried to protect the terrified civilians because the real end was happening. Boruto's black chakra distorted reality and turned the blessed land into a pure hell. Kawaki tried to use his red karma to quickly absorb the energy from one of the deadly meteors. He raised his bloody and shaking hand, but the technique failed in a totally miserable way. The 11-tailed boy came ripping down from the sky and stepped on the wretched traitor's outstretched hand. Boruto crushed Kawaki's fingers and then ripped off his right arm without any hesitation. The freakish scream of pain from the Hokage's killer tore through the heavy and dirty air of poor Konoha. The colossal 11-tailed beast grabbed Kawaki by the hair and lifted him high into the air. The voice distorted by the dark chakra and Naruto's fragmented soul spoke very cruel truths. The monster said, laughing, that the real punishment was only at its absolute beginning. The massive 11th tail pierced Kawaki's chest, but it didn't hit his racing heart. The dark goal wasn't to kill him fast, but to torture the miserable enemy's soul forever. Boruto injected the poisonous chakra directly into the enemy's open veins and began to corrode his DNA. The pain was so indescribable that Kawaki begged, crying for his own death. Man, you need to focus on this brutal scene because the horror show stopped suddenly. The host's human body couldn't carry the weight of 2 giant souls and 11 divine tails anymore. The boy spat a huge puddle of black blood on the ground, and the aura of supreme power wavered. He fell to his knees and let go of Kawaki because an agonizing pain sliced through his mind. The vision of the real world began to spin fast, and the destroyed landscape around him completely vanished. Boruto blacked out in the physical world and woke up lying inside his own cold and very dark subconscious. Cold water dripped onto the wet floor, and the boy looked forward feeling immense dread. A massive golden cage appeared in front of him with its thick bars totally destroyed. The silence of the place was terrifying and squeezed the boy's heart in an unbearable and cruel way. A pair of glowing blue eyes opened in the middle of that deep and dark shadow. The water under his feet began to boil violently, and fear dominated every part of his fragile body. A smiling and hate-filled figure stepped out of the shadows, revealing a malignant and corrupted version of the Seventh himself. Bro, the corrupted figure of Naruto laughed loudly, and the macabre sound echoed throughout Boruto's mind. The fake Seventh moved fast and grabbed the boy by the neck with absurd strength. The water on the ground rose and formed thick chains because the beast wanted to crush his soul. Boruto tried to fight back, but despair paralyzed his muscles completely. The evil version of his father threw the boy against the broken cage, and the mental pain was terrible. The monster spoke with a double voice and said that hate was the only way out of the pain. Boruto spat spiritual blood and looked at the distorted face of the man he loved most. He realized then that this wasn't his father, but pure evil. The boy closed his eyes and focused his mind to reject that cursed and cruel illusion. He screamed Naruto's name and released a pulse of pure blue chakra from inside his heart. The energy shock pushed the corrupted monster back, and the darkness of the place began to shake. The still water on the ground spun hard and formed a glowing whirlpool. Man, the dirty water washed away the black filth, and a very hot flash illuminated the entire subconscious. The monster screamed in pain, and its corrupted shell began to crack from top to bottom. Golden light tore through the darkness, and the real soul of the Seventh Hokage stepped out of that terrifying cocoon. He wasn't hurt and wore the old white cape vibrating with an unexplainable peace. Naruto walked slowly toward his son, and his gaze overflowed with a giant and very true love. Boruto started crying in desperation because the guilt of his father's death crushed his chest without mercy. The seventh knelt in the water and hugged the boy with a soft and protective strength. The heat of that hug melted the fear and healed the wounds of the young ninja's soul. His father spoke softly and said that the guilt wasn't the boy's and that destiny always collects a price. He explained that the 11th tail was the accumulation of all the hate in the universe and the residual chakra. Naruto smiled and warned him that the Uzumaki family's love was the only force capable of dominating this beast. Boruto tightened the hug and felt his father's life energy flow into his veins. Listen, the final will of fire was passed in that exact and tiny miraculous millisecond. Naruto's golden chakra burned the beast's black aura and purified the cursed karma mark. The subconscious changed shape, and a beautiful blue sky replaced the dark and oppressive ceiling. The 11-tailed beast roared in the back of his mind, but now it was trapped and totally controlled. Naruto began to glow very brightly because his time in this spiritual world was coming to an end. He touched his son's forehead and told him to protect the village from the shadows and never lose his own essence. The seventh's body turned into thousands of light particles and rose to the infinite and calm sky. Boruto wiped his tears and lifted his head with a serious and totally focused look. His mind was pulled back to the physical world, and the air in Konoha began to circulate fast again. Boruto opened his eyes, and the corrupted purple color vanished and gave way to a divine and relentless blue. The monstrous 11 tails shrank in size and transformed into a clean and very majestic chakra cloak. The boy was no longer a monster out of control, but the true and only ninja god. Kawaki looked up with his destroyed body and trembled because the spiritual pressure was now cold and calculating. Boruto floated slowly, and his aura healed Sasuke's wounds and put out the fire around the village. He reached out his right hand, and a sword of pure energy appeared cutting through the wind with an absurd sound. But then Konoha's sky cracked in the middle, and a giant golden portal swallowed the sunlight. Bro, you need to feel the weight of this moment, because the peace lasted for exactly one single and miserable second. 3 divine silhouettes stepped out of the portal, and their energy made Boruto's new cloak waver. They were the supreme gods of the Otsutsuki clan, and they came to take back the stolen power of the 11th tail. Their leader smiled macabrely and opened a central eye that reflected the absolute end of the entire universe. The supreme leader of the Otsutsuki raised his pale hand, and the gravity of the entire planet simply stopped working. Man, you need to imagine the despair because the mountains around Konoha began to float like dust. Boruto didn't back down an inch and just gripped the hilt of his bright energy sword. He knew this was the final test to honor his father's sacrifice. The 2 lesser gods advanced at light speed and tried to pierce the boy with dimensional stakes. But Boruto just blinked, and the 11th tail whipped the air, breaking space and time. The stakes turned to ash, and the 2 gods were thrown into the void with colossal force. The power of the divine cloak was totally absolute and protected the hero from any cowardly attack. The supreme leader growled in anger, and his central eye fired a beam of black and purely devastating light. The attack ripped through the atmosphere and promised to wipe the entire village from existence in a single and miserable second. Boruto swung the golden sword and cut the beam of light in half with absurd ease. The dark energy diverted to the sides and exploded across the entire horizon, leaving the sky painted in blood. Dude, the alien god panicked and tried to open a golden portal to escape that invincible anomaly. Boruto appeared behind his back before the portal could even finish opening and whispered a very cold phrase. He said that the era of parasites was over and drove the blade straight into the enemy's heart. The Otsutsuki leader screamed, and his body began to turn to cosmic dust instantly. The multiversal threat was decimated, but the hero knew his power was too dangerous to stay there. The aura of the 11 tails was so massive that the very nature of Konoha continued to die slowly around him. Boruto looked at Sasuke and Himawari with a gaze filled with a very deep sadness. He understood, then, that the destiny of a true protector is to always live in darkness and solitude. The boy walked to Kawaki's broken body and sealed the traitor's karma with a totally impenetrable jutsu. He healed his younger sister's last wounds from a distance and gave a faint smile to ease her heart. Boruto turned his back on the village he loved so much and used his sword to cut through the fabric of the universe. A dark and silent dimensional rift opened right in front of him. Sasuke tried to shout his student's name, but his injured body wouldn't let any sound out of his dry throat. Himawari cried very loudly, but she understood deep in her soul that her brother was making the supreme sacrifice. Boruto stepped into the dark rift, and the portal closed, leaving a heavy and eternal silence in Konoha. The legend of the Seventh Hokage ended there, but the myth of the lonely god of shadows had only just begun. Man, the dimension Boruto entered was a freezing void filled with dead stars floating in nothingness. He floated through the dark space and used his Jugenai to track the scattered chakra of the last living enemies. His multiversal hunt would be cold and totally relentless because he swore to exterminate the root of all evil. But the boy stopped suddenly because an overwhelming presence paralyzed his instincts. A giant throne made of divine bones appeared floating in the middle of that absolute and totally terrifying darkness. A massive and sleeping figure rested on the throne with thousands of karma marks spread across its entire body. Boruto gripped his sword and broke out in a cold sweat because he recognized the terrifying entity from the old ninja legends. That was the real original body of Shibai Otsutsuki, and he wasn't dead like everyone always thought. Shibai's giant eyes opened slowly, and the 11th tail screamed in pure terror inside the hero's mind. The ancestral entity smiled and said he was waiting for the divine seed to ripen so he could finally devour the entire galaxy. The real nightmare is going to start now, bro, and you need to drop that massive like and subscribe fast so you don't miss the next videos. I'll see you there.